So, um, look around the table at your next executive meeting. Because according to this massive psychological survey we're going to look at today, 3 out of 4 of those, confident, put-together professionals sitting in that room with you, they're secretly terrified they aren't good enough to be there.
Yeah, it's a staggering statistic, and it really just completely upends the way we usually think about professional preparation.
Right, totally. Because no matter how sharp their suits are or like how polished their slide decks look, 75% of them are actively wrestling with this deep, persistent lack of confidence.
Exactly. We spend all our time agonizing over the tangible stuff, the market beta, the bullet points, financial projections, but we completely ignore the internal narrative of the actual person delivering that data.
Which is wild.
Uh-huh.
So welcome to today's deep dive. Whether you're prepping for a high-stakes presentation right now, stepping into a new leadership role, or you just want to understand the hidden psychology of why some people naturally draw success while others, repel it, today's mission is highly relevant for you.
It really is.
We are examining a foundational piece of source material today. It's Chapter 1 of Norman Vincent Peale's classic book, The Power of Positive Thinking, Believe in Yourself. And our goal here isn't just to, summarize his points, but to really decode the mechanics behind them.
Yeah, we want to figure out how these feelings of inadequacy are actually formed in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how they covertly sabotage our workplace performance. Plus, we're going to get into the specific actionable strategies you can use to neurologically rewire your brain for confidence.
Right.
So, okay, let's unpack this.
Well, the core thesis established right at the beginning of the text is pretty uncompromising. The author argues that without a humble but, reasonable confidence in your own powers, you just simply cannot be successful or happy.
Right. It's not just a nice to have.
No, not at all. A sense of inferiority isn't just some mild discomfort. He says it is an active mechanism that interferes with your hopes. And that university survey he references, the one with 600 psychology students where 3/4 cited a lack of confidence as their most difficult personal problem, that proves this is basically an epidemic of the mind.
So if 3/4 of us are walking around feeling like imposters, where is this actually coming from?
Well, the source material suggests that to fix this in our present careers, we really have to look backward.
We're all carrying this invisible baggage from our past. And the author actually shares a rather painful personal story to illustrate how those early labels get permanently etched into our self-image.
He does, and it's a fascinating look at overcompensation. So as a boy, the author was on a track team full of energy, but he was just painfully thin. He hated being called skinny.
Oh, man. Kids can be brutal with that kind of stuff.
They really can, and he internalized that label as a profound weakness. So he went to these extreme, almost absurd lengths to change his physical reality.
What did he do?
Well, he forced himself to drink cod liver oil, and he ate literally thousands of chocolate sundaes with whipped cream, just trying to get tough and, as he put it, fat.
Wow, which is such a visceral image of a kid desperately trying to outrun a label. But the irony is it backfired entirely, right?
Completely backfired. I mean, his metabolism handled it fine during his youth, but the moment he hit age 30, he suddenly ballooned up. Oh, no. Yeah. His subconscious drive to not be skinny resulted in him becoming deeply self-conscious about being too heavy. So then he was forced to agonize over losing 40 pounds. The physical reality changed, but that internal feeling of being wrong for the room, that just remained constant.
That is so telling. And it wasn't just his physical appearance either. The text talks about how he was a preacher's son, which, came with its own set of suffocating expectations.
Right, he was constantly stereotyped by the community.
Yeah, if he acted like a normal, rambunctious kid, the adults would subtly shame him, that imply a preacher's son had to be perfectly behaved and mild-mannered all the time.
And he rebelled so hard against that pigeonholing that he actually vowed he would never become a preacher himself. Plus, his family forced him into public speaking before he was ready, which absolutely terrified him.
Which makes sense. I mean, those early experiences created a tremendous psychological barrier for him. Even much later in life, as this highly successful individual, he still had to use specific cognitive devices to overcome the twinge of terror that would hit him the second he stepped onto a platform.
It's wild how those childhood dynamics map so directly onto the modern corporate world, too. The text mentions the classic sibling dynamic, the older brother who gets all A's while you get C's.
Oh, yeah, the classic comparison trap. You internalize that grading curve, and you just assume you are doomed to get C's in everything for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
It feels like the equivalent of being pigeonholed early in your career as the tech person or like the numbers person. Everyone assumes you lack soft skills or leadership potential,
Yeah.
and eventually you start believing that limitation yourself, even when it isn't true at all.
And the author points out that this is a massive fallacy. The A student might peak academically and just stop achieving the moment they receive their diploma.
Right.
Meanwhile, the C student, who perhaps had to learn, resilience and creative problem solving, often goes on to get the real A's in life. But if you absorb that C student identity during those formative years, your subconscious builds a glass ceiling over your potential.
And that glass ceiling doesn't just hold you back. It can actually cause you to actively blow up your own career. There's this brilliant story in the text about an executive assistant that perfectly illustrates the sheer destructive power of an inferiority complex in the workplace.
Oh, the assistant story. Yeah, it is a perfect case study of professional self-sabotage. So there was an executive who genuinely wanted to promote this highly qualified young man to be his direct administrative assistant.
Okay, sounds like a great opportunity.
It was. But he couldn't do it because the young man was a security risk. He just kept talking too much and leaking highly confidential industry secrets to his associates. See, on paper, that makes zero sense. Why would a smart, qualified guy risk a massive promotion just to gossip? I mean, what's the payoff?
Well, the executive actually took the time to analyze the root cause of this behavior, and he discovered it was a severe inferiority complex driven by the young man's background.
Interesting.
Yeah, he was reared in poverty, didn't have a college degree, and didn't belong to any prestigious fraternities. Yet his specific industry was populated almost entirely by wealthy, highly educated fraternity men.
Ah, so he felt entirely out of his depth socially. Like he was constantly trying to prove he belonged in the room with these guys.
Precisely that. To compensate for feeling educationally and socially inferior, his subconscious mind devised this mechanism to artificially inflate his ego.
By leaking the secrets.
Right. Because his position gave him access to private, high-level executive conversations, he possessed something the wealthy fraternity men did not. So he would parade this inside information around them. He was essentially trading confidential company secrets for their temporary admiration and envy just to validate his own worth. I find that fascinating because it shows that self-sabotage isn't just random flailing. It's actually a very logical, albeit destructive, survival mechanism your brain uses to protect your ego.
It's trying to keep you safe in a really twisted way.
Exactly. But here's my question. Does simply diagnosing the problem actually fix it? Like, if a kind boss pulls you aside and says, hey, I know you grew up poor, but you have to stop gossiping to feel important, does that intellectual awareness rewire the behavior?
That is the critical distinction the source makes. Intellectual self-knowledge is step one. The employer did point out this flaw to the young man, and recognizing the root cause was definitely necessary.
But not sufficient.
Right. Awareness alone is static. The text makes it clear that the young man also had to practice active, daily techniques to recondition his mind. He had to consciously replace his feelings of inferiority with a foundation of faith to actually release his real capabilities.
Okay, I can see how that kind of deep, chronic self-sabotage requires long-term work. You have to trace it back, figure out your triggers, rebuild your self-image. But let's shift gears to a totally different scenario.
Okay, what do you have in mind?
What happens when you don't have months to unpack your childhood trauma? What is the protocol for acute panic? You are walking into the most important pitch of your life in 10 minutes, your palms are sweating, and your brain is screaming that you are going to fail.
The text actually provides a remarkable framework for that exact emergency. There's a story of a 40-year-old man who approached the author backstage after a convention.
I remember this one.
Yeah, he was in a state of absolute paralyzing terror over an impending meeting. He called it the most important business deal of his life, and he was operating under this crushing all-or-nothing mindset.
Yeah, he literally said to the author, if I succeed, it means everything to me. If I fail, I'm done for. Which is just a terrifying amount of pressure to put on one single conversation.
Yeah.
And he admitted he had been tormented all his life by this terrible disbelief in himself.
He was a mess. So the author gave him a highly specific tactical formula. He was very clear with the man up front, though. He said, discovering the root cause of a lifetime of fear is like a physician probing a complex physical ailment. That takes time.
You can't fix that in an afternoon.
Exactly. But to survive the immediate crisis, to just get through the meeting that was looming over him, he prescribed a regimen of repetitive affirmation. Specifically, he instructed him to use a verse from the Bible, Philippians 4:3. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me.
And the instructions weren't just, hey, try to think positive thoughts today. It was a strict dosage. Repeat the phrase several times after getting into bed. Repeat it 3 times upon waking up. Repeat it 3 additional times on the way to the important appointment.
The structure of it is vital, and the author watched the immediate physical result of this intervention. Just by committing to the formula, the man squared his shoulders and walked out into the night with visibly renewed faith.
Wow. And did it work?
It did. Later, the businessman reported back that the simple formula did wonders. It temporarily shifted his entire personality, allowing him to walk into the room projecting an energy that drew success toward him, rather than the desperate energy that usually repels it.
That's incredible.
Now, he did go on to do the deep scientific counseling later to clear away the childhood causes, but the affirmation is what pulled him through the acute crisis.
Okay, let me push back on this a little bit, because this is where the material can be hard for a modern professional to swallow.
Fair enough.
Isn't this just a mental trick? Like, if you are internally terrified, does repeating a few words actually generate real confidence? Or are you just faking it until the meeting ends? It feels a bit like hitting Control-Alt-Delete on a frozen computer. It reboots the system so you can do your presentation, but it doesn't actually fix the underlying software bug.
I mean, that is a highly accurate analogy. It is a hard reset for your brain. If we examine this through the lens of modern psychology, when you are in a state of acute panic, your brain is caught in a spiraling, catastrophic feedback loop. You are exclusively fixated on the mechanics of failure.
Right, you're just picturing everything going wrong.
Exactly. So repetitive suggestion acts as a severe cognitive pattern interrupt. By forcing a new, authoritative concept into your working memory, especially one rooted in a deep spiritual or philosophical conviction, you disrupt the panic spiral.
So it breaks the loop.
It breaks the loop. It alters your neurochemistry just enough to relax your physical demeanor, steady your voice, and give you the temporary executive function required to survive the high-stakes moment.
Okay, so the mental hard reset saves you in the emergency room. But you cannot live your entire professional life in a state of constant emergency rebooting, right? That would be exhausting. How do you move from that acute Band-Aid to building long-term sustainable confidence on a daily basis?
Well, this brings us to the story of the traveling salesman on the icy Midwestern morning. The author was riding shotgun with this man, who was driving quite fast on these treacherous, slippery roads.
Sounds stressful.
Very. And when the author expressed a bit of concern, the salesman explained that he actually used to be terrified of absolutely everything. Airplane trips, car rides, and especially failing at his job. The fear made him miserable, and worse, it was completely tanking his sales numbers.
Which makes perfect psychological sense if you think about it. If you were driving from client to client, just marinating in anxiety, by the time you walk into their office, your micro-expressions, your tone of voice, your posture, everything is going to scream defeat.
Oh, absolutely.
You're basically inviting them to say no.
It's the self-fulfilling prophecy of negative expectation. So to combat this, the salesman developed a system for continuous mental reconditioning. He called it his wonderful plan.
What was the plan?
He clipped small cards to the instrument panel of his car right below the windshield. As he drove from town to town, he would cycle through these visual cues, committing the affirmations to memory and reciting them. One of the primary phrases he used was Romans 8:31, "If God be for us, who can be against us?"
It is basically an early analog version of habit stacking, or like neuro-linguistic programming. He attached a cognitive reframing exercise to the physical act of driving.
That's exactly what it is.
So if your mind is an engine, fear is like running on dirty fuel. You are driving to a client drinking what the source calls defeat thoughts, and the engine sputters and stalls. This dashboard trick is literally flushing the fuel lines mid-commute.
I love that analogy.
But let's look at the actual mechanics of the outcome. A positive attitude doesn't magically make a terrible product fly off the shelves, right?
True.
How does active thought conditioning actually change external business metrics?
Well, it doesn't alter the product. It fundamentally alters the human instrument delivering the product. The text states a profound psychological truth. We build up the feeling of insecurity or security by how we think.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
If you fixate your attention on sinister expectations of dire events, your brain subconsciously aligns your actions to match that reality. You tend to create, by the power of thought, the very condition you fear.
So you walk in expecting a hostile negotiation, so you start the meeting defensively, which makes the client hostile. It's a loop.
Exactly the mechanism. The salesman's numbers went up because his potential powers were suddenly unbridled from that defeat psychology. He just stopped driving up to customers expecting rejection.
That makes a lot of sense.
But the text emphasizes that this kind of internal shift isn't achieved through casual, half-hearted wishing. It requires serious, focused intention. The source actually discusses the role of prayer and spiritual affirmation here, offering a really compelling quote from Roland Hayes' grandfather.
Oh, I found this concept fascinating. He told his grandson that ordinary casual prayers don't work for big troubles. When you're facing massive challenges, you need deep prayers that have plenty of suction.
Plenty of suction. It is just a brilliant way to describe emotional resonance and cognitive commitment.
Yeah.
A surface-level, perfunctory affirmation like just mumbling, "I will be fine," while your brain is screaming in panic, has absolutely no psychological weight.
Right, your brain knows you're lying.
Exactly. Harlow B. Andrews is also quoted in the text, stating, "God will rate you according to the size of your prayers." The underlying principle is that breaking a lifetime of deep-seated inadequacy requires dynamic, forceful belief. You have to drive those confident thoughts deep into your subconscious until they anchor there.
So we have explored how to handle the emergency meeting panic, and we have a strategy for the daily commute maintenance to keep the engine running clean. But let's push this to the absolute limit.
Okay, let's do it.
What happens when the situation isn't just in your head? Like, what happens when you face total ruin and the external facts on the ground are genuinely, objectively catastrophic?
This is where the application of these principles becomes incredibly challenging, but also the most necessary. The text introduces a 52-year-old man who came to the author in a state of total, paralyzing despondency.
He was in a really bad place.
Terrible. He claimed he was all through, that he had lost absolutely everything, and that at 52 he was simply too old to start over. The fear had completely consumed his entire reality.
And what I appreciate about the author's response here is that he doesn't just pat the guy on the back and offer, toxic platitudes. He forces him into a highly logical exercise. He pulls out a piece of paper and says, let's list the values you have left. Let's do a forensic accounting of your actual life.
Yes, they systematically evaluated his personal assets against his despair. And through a series of pointed questions, they cataloged 7 distinct, undeniable assets.
What were they again?
So he had a wonderful wife of 30 years who remained fiercely loyal, 3 devoted children, supportive friends who respected him, clear integrity with no shameful secrets, good physical health, the advantage of living in the United States, which he viewed as a land of opportunity, and his religious faith.
And when the man looked at that list written out on paper, the text says he actually grinned ashamedly. He realized the facts of his life did not match the totality of his despair. He actually had plenty of foundational power left to start over.
This specific exercise introduces a central thesis of the entire text, which is captured perfectly in a quote by the famous psychiatrist Dr. Carl Menninger. Attitudes are more important than facts.
Now, let me stop you there, because that phrase, attitudes are more important than facts, can sound dangerously close to toxic positivity.
It really can.
Right. Like, are we telling the listener to just put on blinders and ignore bad data? If my company is functionally bankrupt and we are missing payroll, writing down that I have good physical health and a nice family doesn't pay the creditors?
That is the most common and honestly most logical pushback to this philosophy. But the source text is very careful to clarify its stance here. This approach does not rule out objective reality. Difficulties, bankruptcies, and failures, they must be studied, analyzed, and efficiently dealt with.
Okay.
But, and this is the critical mechanism, they must not be inflated by fear.
So the facts might be genuinely bad, but the fear acts as a multiplier, making them seem insurmountable.
Precisely. An inferiority complex forces you to view all facts through heavily discolored lenses. The goal of positive thinking is not to ignore the facts. The secret of correction is to gain a normal, clear view of the problem, which is always slanted slightly on the positive side.
Just slightly positive.
Right. That slight positive slant is what provides the actual physical energy and mental clarity required to tackle the bad facts. If you permit a negative fact to overwhelm your mind before you even begin to strategize a solution, you're defeated before you take the first step.
Man, that reframes the entire concept for me. It isn't about denying reality. It's about protecting your capacity to deal with reality, which brings up this phenomenal concept introduced at the end of the chapter called the vacuum cleaner method.
Oh, this is a brilliant tactical approach used by a highly effective executive mentioned in the text. So when this executive is in a room with colleagues who are viewing a new proposition with intense pessimism, he doesn't aggressively argue the facts with them.
Because arguing often just entrenches people in their negativity. Right?
Exactly. Instead, he uses the vacuum cleaner method. He asks a series of carefully calibrated questions designed to suck the dust, meaning the negative attitudes, right out of their minds.
So if someone says, this market is terrible, we shouldn't launch, he doesn't just say, you're wrong. He asks, what specific indicators make you say that? Or have we ever seen a competitor thrive in a similar downturn? He literally forces them to unpack their own pessimism.
Exactly. He draws the fear out into the open where it just loses its power. And once the negative dust is cleared from the room, he quietly suggests positive, constructive ideas to reframe the remaining facts. The external facts of the market haven't changed, but the collective attitude of the room toward those facts has fundamentally shifted.
Which ultimately changes the entire trajectory of the project, sucking the negative dust right out of the room. I love the mechanics of that.
It's so practical.
It really is. So let's synthesize the core insights here for the listener's workplace toolkit. The text leaves us with 10 actionable rules for overcoming inadequacy, and a few immediately stand out for modern application. First, formulate an indelible mental picture of yourself succeeding and hold it tenaciously. The mind always tries to complete what it pictures, so never let that image fade.
That's huge.
Second, whenever a negative thought about your personal abilities pops into your head, deliberately voice a positive thought to cancel it out. Interrupt the pattern. And third, make a true objective estimate of your own ability and then consciously raise that estimate by 10%.
And underlying all of these cognitive strategies is the absolute unavoidable necessity of taking action despite your fear. Mental reframing is totally useless if it doesn't lead to physical action.
Right, you actually have to do the thing.
Yes. The text quotes Ralph Waldo Emerson, who famously declared, "Do the thing you fear and the death of fear is certain." It also shares this striking interaction from Stonewall Jackson, who was listening to a timorous subordinate list off all the terrible things he was afraid might happen.
What are you saying?
Jackson cut him off and just said, "General, never take counsel of your fears."
Wow. You cannot wait until you feel perfectly brave to start. You just have to build the confidence by actually doing the thing that scares you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden roots of confidence. We just discussed the vacuum cleaner method for clearing the pessimistic dust out of a room. So as you head into your next executive meeting or tackle that daunting project you've been putting off, ask yourself, what is your personal vacuum cleaner? How can you subtly shift the attitudes of the people around you? Not by fighting over the facts, but by changing the energetic weather in the room.